Hi, I am Jenny and welcome to FREEJOO, the global community of educators. Let me show you why as an educator you should make FREEJOO an important part of your teaching and learning practice. A community of teaching practice is important for any educator. On FREEJOO you will be able to access CollabEd, which is like LinkedIn but for educators. Here you will be able to connect and network with other educators from all around the world. You can build your own community of teaching practice and/or join one of the many other existing groups and learn and share ideas, lesson plans, etc. with each other. Then, for a more formalized approach to professional development, you can go to SkillEd, which is like Netflix for educators. Here, you will be able to access a wide range of courses designed by global experts that will help you to learn about new pedagogical, technical, and soft skills, all related to 21st century education and the future of work. There are more than 20 courses available for free, and for more advanced level courses, you can upgrade to the Silver membership plan for just $20 per year and get access to all courses designed by Akadasia. The courses are available in English and in several other Asian languages. And what's more, you will receive a free verifiable and tamper-proof digital certificate for each course that you complete. If you have upgraded your membership to the Silver, Gold, or Platinum plans, you also get access to DesignEd, which is like Canva for educators. Here you will find the easiest and fastest way to practice your own instructional design skills and build your own courses. We have pre-integrated several third-party edtech apps like Flipgrid, Canva, Mentimeter, Padlet, H5P, Zoom, etc. right into FREEJOO so you can make your courses engaging and fun for your own learners. As you can see, there is a lot you can do on FREEJOO as an educator. So what are you waiting for? Go to www.freejoo.com and get your very own free lifetime membership today. See you soon on FREEJOO.
Welcome. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Hi, Jake.
Hi, Kirsten. Happy International Women's Day to you, our
Thank you
guests, and
so
all
much.
our wonderful teachers who are with us today.
Exactly. And thank you all for joining us. We hope everyone is having a wonderful day. We have a very timely and timeless discussion today about finding common ground, how to understand, address, and improve diversity and inclusion. Jake, who's joining us today?
Right, let me go ahead and introduce our wonderful panel of speakers and guests this afternoon. It will help us gain more perspective and understand the issues of inclusion and diversity more. Let me start with our guest from the Philippines. She's a well-renowned writer, translator, and copyright advocate in the Philippines. Being active in publishing, she was recognized as a book champion and intellectual property ambassador of the country in the year 2015. She has written and published 11 books by creative writing, translating, editing, and illustrating. She now serves in the intertextual division of the Cultural Center of the Philippines Cultural Content Department. She may be reached through her email beverlyc@gmail.com, and some of her books are free to read at babe-ang.blogspot.com. Later we'll post that. So dear friends from the Philippines, let's all welcome Miss Beverly Bebang C.
Hi everyone, good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me and for the opportunity to share.
Thank you so much for joining us.
Okay, our next guest is from the United Kingdom. She's the head of diversity and inclusion at Birmingham Pride. She's the first queer Muslim woman to lead a pride parade in Britain, and is also the first woman and POC to be appointed within the team at Birmingham Pride. An ex-BBC producer, she also runs a not-for-profit floating hotel called Botel Birmingham, with which she hopes to diversify the city's waterways using the arts. On the side, she's also a very good cricket player. So let's all welcome Saima Razak from the United Kingdom.
Good morning, Assalamu alaikum. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me. It's a bit early here. It's 7 in the morning, so I'm still a little bit asleep.
Get your cup of tea and you'll be good. Excellent.
And finally, to complete our panel of guests for this fireside chat, we have another guest from the United Kingdom. She's a diversity, equality, and inclusion lead across 2 secondary schools, provides teacher training, and writes articles on diversity, equality, and inclusion within the education sector. After several classroom discussions and the encouragement of her students, she started the blog and award nominated podcast called School Should Be, a platform for students, parents, and teachers to discuss all the things schools should be, to encourage diversity of thought, discuss different perspectives, and centralized voices and topics we often do not explore fully in schools. She believes that school is the best place for students to learn how to form meaningful relationships, respect everyone we meet, and in general, how to adult well. From the United Kingdom, dear friends, it's all welcome, Ms. Zahara Chowdhury.
Good morning. Hope everybody is well. Like Simon, it's very early here. But yeah, no, looking forward to this conversation.
Excellent. Well, I'm going to invite Beverly and Sai to turn their cameras back on so we can have a chat. And I think Jake is going to go and do some stuff in the background for a little while, and we get to have our conversation. So thank you all. And I know it's early for you. It's 2 a.m. for me. I'm coming from Holland, Michigan. So, but it's really, I love having these conversations. And I want to thank you all so much for joining and talking about this one. Diversity is such a massively important but massive topic. So it's going to mean different things to different people. And I'm just going to start out with what seems to be a very basic, but I know it's a very complicated question for all of you. Why do you believe diversity matters? And whoever would like to go first, this is just a chat. Sai.
So diversity is a term I think is problematic if you don't look at it from an intersectional lens, but we'll come to that later. But diversity means representation. So if we look at around the world, if we look at the people who have the most powerful jobs, the most positions of power, they are cisgendered white men. So representation, whether it's in business or education, makes somebody feel valued, and especially a young person might inspire them to be the best person. I'll just give you a bit of an example. I've been educated in white spaces. As you know, Kirsten, we were at university together. I've then worked in white spaces, and it was only over the last few years that I've had to do a lot of unpacking and admit to myself that because I was seeing all this whiteness around me, I was aspiring to whiteness. And, you know, I think decolonization is very important. So for me, diversity is representation, and in an educational setting, also inspiration.
Well, and it's funny I'll get to this, the panelists. Sai and I went to, well, I was doing my PhD. You were an undergrad. And I was a foreigner in a foreign land. And the reason I got to know Sai is because I joined the cricket club. I was terrified. And the cricket club became this wonderful place of inclusion, not only for me, but for my 2 kids. And if you remember all the issues with my son being bullied and beaten and everything, you know, you were one of the people that was really a great source of comfort and advice and everything. So I sincerely thank you not only for what you did for my family years ago, far too many that I don't want to remember, but, you know, for just being there and being here today. It means a lot to me that you're here. And I mean, I thank all the panelists, but Sai, for you, this is, you know, it reminds me of just the way you made me always feel included and welcome when I was a foreigner in a foreign land. So,
I think it's that concept of other, though, isn't it? So when you've been marginalized, you can then empathize and relate to other people who might become others. So I think, yeah, as this conversation progresses, I think intersectionality is very important. And that's probably, you know, because I understood intersectionality, probably couldn't have articulated it then as an undergrad. Too busy partying, probably. But no, now I get it. And I think it's just, yeah, always being othered. You then understand that, you know, everyone else experiences that too.
Yeah.
So it's great to be here. Thank you.
I just had a flash to some of our social nights, which is why I laughed. Please, who else would like to join it and just answer the question, why do you believe diversity matters?
Sure, yeah. So I am having, like, my career has always been in schools, and I'm that typical sort of graduate where I went straight from university back into education. And like Sai just said, I didn't realize that I was being raised, and almost even from a familial standpoint, I guess, from a state of belonging and acceptance, aspiring to whiteness and aspiring to white culture, which again, I know that can be quite a jarring term. For example, there is a school in the UK here at the moment who have been criticised for the level of social justice work that they've started to champion and do. And as much as social justice, I know we'll probably get onto this, is still slightly different to diversity, it all, like I was saying, the intersectionality of diversity, social justice is a part of that, because I think, just like this panel shows, our young people, and even us now, like, technology has globally connected us beyond our imagination, and you know, AI is so diverse. And even if you think about tech and STEM from an education standpoint, especially here in the UK, being like a driving force for getting women into education, for getting women into the tech spaces, and also, like, even schools and education, you have to have some sort of digital awareness. The majority of even people and voices I hear are from diverse backgrounds. You know, they're not, and it's quite ironic, like I just said, and I couldn't agree more, that when we look at it statistically, the people with power, the people who manage, direct, create workplace and education culture are cisgendered white men, and then, you know, probably cisgendered white women. So it's the irony is that that small percentage of people at the top are effectively creating the culture for the global majority, which is diverse, ethnically diverse, gender-wise diverse, you know, neurodiversity. So I just think that's why diversity matters, because there was a point where our perception of aspiration and representation was actually wrong, and now tech and digital social media is actually showing us that, oh, we're actually part of the you know, I point out myself being diverse, you know, we're part of the majority. So I think that's why it really matters to learn about it as well.
Thank you. I think you're absolutely right. Beverly, what would you like to add?
Yes, my answer is short. I think diversity matters because the real world is diverse, and diversity makes our life exciting. And if there's just one color in this world, that would be so boring. And if there's just one kind of clothes that everybody wears, we would all look the same, and we don't want that.
Well, and
That's it.
thank you. Let's be clear, when we talk about diversity, and I'm not going to hit everything, it is race, it is gender identity, it is sexual orientation, it is age, it is socioeconomic status, it is education level, it is religion. What am I missing? I know I've only begun to scratch the surface. And so it's hard. And I need to admit, and this is something that I know a lot of people have an issue with. I come from incredible privilege. And, you know, there were some conversations that started happening, and I don't think they've carried on like they should in the States over the last couple of years, where, you know, this idea of white privilege and how a lot of white people are pushing back against this concept of white privilege, because I don't think they really get it. But I know I come from privilege. My parents live 5 miles away. They are married. I am educated. I had the great honor of getting a PhD in the UK. So, you know, I just need to start out by admitting that and taking ownership of it, because I don't think it's fair of me to have this conversation without saying that I come from a position of privilege.
Go on,
Sorry, it looks like
Sarah.
you were going to
No,
say
Simon, you
something.
go. No, Simon, you go.
You sure? I
Yeah.
was just going to say, you know, these words, decolonization, privilege, you know, some people find them very offensive, but really there's no shame in recognizing privilege. And one thing many people don't realize is the term privilege was coined by a white American feminist called Peggy McIntosh. And in 1989, she wrote a paper, which you can Google and you'll find it. I'm happy it's available for free everywhere. And actually, if I just share my privilege, you know, I'm a queer Muslim woman living my best life. My family have accepted me. My faith is entwined into my existence. But actually, the stereotypes I get, or, you know, the privilege that I've got in comparison to, say, my home country is Pakistan. If I was born in Pakistan, the equality, sexual equality, sexual identity, sexual orientation is just not easy. I wouldn't be able to be living my best life. So I recognize my privilege. And I think the same way everyone can recognize their privilege. And it's not an easy thing to do. You have to really, really go to a dark place and really break all those biases you've got, unconscious or conscious. And it's not an easy thing to do. But once you've come out the other side, the world just seems a better place. And then you also mentioned intersectionality. Intersectionality was a coined term by Kimberly Crenshaw, a Black American feminist. And that again was in 1989. And intersectionality explains how some of us might be at the intersection of many different identities. So I just explained I'm a queer, brown, Muslim woman. You know, where do I go? There's no kind of magic roundabout that you can sit at in the middle. And that's intersectionality. I'm not going to go on. I think Zara was going to say something.
No, I honestly, I completely agree, because I'd say that it's interesting that the terms privilege and decolonization come across as really jarring, because even when I majored in, my degree was in English literature, but I majored in decolonization, multicultural literature, intersectional literature from all different backgrounds, countries, and it was and it's a I always try to, I guess, flip it. I use the flip it model quite a lot with students and parents and even colleagues when you're trying to get them to tap into bias, which again, for years, so many of us don't acknowledge that we have. Even I, as someone with protected characteristics, and perhaps I know it's the parallel, or I don't know if that's the right word, is interesting, whereby I have protected characteristics. I perhaps would be more vulnerable in certain situations, Kirsten, than you, for example. But equally, that can work both ways, depending on where you are in the world. And like Sai just said about my background is Pakistan too, and I find my country of origin, and I find that, you know, when I'm talking to students and teachers, and whataboutisms kick in, which we can, you know, talk about as well, I have to work hard to remind them and myself that a conversation around privilege or decolonization, or talking about whose story are we telling, who has power in the room, whose voice matters when it comes to impact and action. It's not that I don't have privilege, it's just that we need to think about privilege in terms as a verb, I guess. So how has somebody else's privilege compared to mine? So even Sai, for example, being, like you said, a queer Muslim, I'm Muslim, but I'm cisgendered, heterosexual. Even within our intersection, like you just said, I would perhaps have, as the status quo, sorry, I use air quotes a lot, as the status quo stands, I would perhaps right now and historically have had more privilege. So I think the terms are jarring, but they don't need to be if you flip it and ask people, and it's lived experiences, ask people to consider, okay, what barriers or opportunities have you had or have you had to overcome in comparison to someone sitting right next to you who supposedly is on, physically equal grounding? You're sitting next to each other in the same classroom or in the same workspace. You both own a computer, both got a mobile phone, all of that sort of stuff. But the intersection perhaps to explore around those terms is impact and opportunity. Like, how have there been certain limitations, even if those limitations are unconscious and you can't see them and they're not tangible? They could be psychological, which is where, again, going back to your first question, Kirsten, about diversity, we know now, not that we know just now, but it has a massive impact on mental health and well-being, which like if we think about the kind of COVID era that we're in at the moment, has accelerated, especially in education, beyond our imagination. So I think that those terms are important, but it's also important to flip it and understand that privilege, it doesn't need to be, like Sai was saying, a jarring term.
Well, and it's interesting. I think the more we talk about things, the less jarring terms. Beverly, would you like to add anything?
Recently I took up biking, and I went somewhere else, and I passed by a market, a wet market. It's where a lot of ordinary Filipinos get their food and meat and chicken and everything. And it was so crowded that there are so many cars, trucks, and jeepneys, public transportations, and motorcycles, and there are so many bikes. And I had to, of course, the space for the bicycles and the motorcycles were already taken by the vendors, by the street vendors. So we were, it was so difficult to move, and I had to, go very, very, very slow just to pass by, just to get by. And even if I was very careful, I suddenly, my bike hit a very old woman in her arm. My handlebar hit an old woman on her arm. So at first, my first reaction was I got angry. I got angry because I was very slow. I was already adjusting to the situation, but she was angry. She was mad at me too, and she said, "You hurt me." I said, "I I was already going slow, and you still, you had to walk here." I told her, and then I moved forward, and our conversation stopped. And then it took me a whole afternoon to realize that I was speaking from a privilege of position because I was the one who had a vehicle. I should have, I should have gotten off my bike or took a different route because I was the one who has mobility in that afternoon. And I realized that the reason why the old woman was walking on that part of the street because she had nowhere else. She had nowhere else to walk. She had no more space to walk, to buy her things. And I think even if I'm an Asian woman, even if I am a woman, even if I am not rich, I still have some privilege, that uh, should be still checked every day, every experience, and every time. Yeah.
I was just going to say there, like coming in, just working with, and I know we all, especially working with young people, where you're, and even colleagues, like, because DEI, it crosses over into like HR, people and culture, and then teaching those human skills, as Simon Sinek would call them. it is that sort of, like you said, Beverly, at that point in that particular example, your sort of fight or flight mechanism kicks in. Your own sort of, like, your own lived experience, like your background, you were stressed, you were running late, or, you know, we're human at the end of the day. And it is sometimes, I think, the thought of being actively empathetic can feel really overwhelming, and then we can find it can feel quite, when I've spoken to colleagues about it, especially adults more than children, I think, they find it to be quite unapologetic and unforgiving, when actually it's almost like an acknowledgement, really. I think empathy is effectively acknowledging yourself, your presence, your consciousness in a particular situation. We all do it, don't we? Like, we all sort of, that's probably why sometimes having, like, sending a message is better than, you know, or like, kind of, you know, when you don't want to react in a situation whereby you say something that you don't mean. So the sort of I've worked recently with an author here called FREEJOO, who has written a book called Bringing Up Race, and it's all about raising a kind child in a prejudiced world. And the book is very much about how to be anti-racist and just aware of the, like, statistically, as well as from a lived experience perspective, the everyday situations that people from diverse backgrounds, race in this in the context of her book, face. And when she's asked by parents, because it's more of like, I recommend it to teachers, but it's also a parenting book, and when they say, well, what do we do if, you know, our child does sort of become part of the crowd and start using discriminatory language, or that's how I was raised, that's the kind of school I went to, there was a hierarchy when I was younger, her advice is always to pause and breathe. And I really like that, because actually we don't do that enough in the 21st century modern world, do we? Like, everything's go, go, go. And I know that's kind of a long-winded way of saying, I just think our professional working culture has had an impact on perhaps toxic diversity as well, in a way where sometimes we're not as forgiving, but equally as in ourselves, we just need to acknowledge that we need to be a bit more empathetic, understand that, I don't know how I've kind of lost my trail of thought. That's baby brain.
No, I get it, and it's interesting because it reminds me of a story
It's
that happened
okay.
this summer. So my youngest years ago came out, and it's weird because it was like, do I say that here? It's not my place to go and tell my youngest story, but so we were having a conversation about when they came out, and it was years ago. And you know, when they came out, I just paused and I said, okay, you know, do you want ice cream? Because we were, you know, we were in Florida, it was hot, and so for me, live your best life. But then later, we had a conversation, and I said, well, you know, it surprised me. You know, I didn't see any. I didn't say this, but I said, you know, it surprised me. You know, you didn't show any signs, or something along those lines. It wasn't a comment that I thought was in any way offensive. I mean, it was like, oh, I didn't see it coming. Um, and so this past summer, they brought that up to me and said, you know, that invalidated who I had been, and, you know, and all my actions until then. And at that moment, I could have taken the direction of explaining that that's not what I meant and explaining what I did mean. But I had this epiphany, and I simply apologized, because it wasn't about me. It wasn't about my voice and what I was intending to do. It was about how my words impacted my youngest child. And we forget that. We feel like we need to explain ourselves instead of actually listening and, you know, and empathizing with the person. So I took ownership of how I made them feel without trying to explain my intent, because my intent is irrelevant. Which brings us to a really important question. What advice do you have for a teacher who wants to start engaging with the topic of diversity? How do you go in a classroom? Because it's huge. We've already hit on how many different kinds of diversity in the half hour we've been talking. What advice do you have for a teacher who wants to start engaging with diversity and making a more inclusive learning environment?
I'm just going to come in at the back of what you said about your child
Oh,
coming
feel
out.
free.
I think,
Do you remember my child? You do, don't you?
yeah, of
Yeah,
course,
of
yeah. And
course.
I was just going to say that I think it's really important that we think about. So for me, my family are very important to me. I'm a Muslim woman. You know, I'm living in Birmingham, surrounded by my family, and I think that when we talk about LGBTQI narratives, it's really important to talk about our family's journey as well. It's not easy for anyone because we live in a heteronormative society. People aren't homophobic, it's society that's homophobic. So actually, if we just work with people and share our stories, and Kirsten, your story is really important because there might be parents or teachers listening to this, and you know, it's okay. It's okay to not be comfortable with the situation. You work through it. So yeah, so I just wanted to come to that because I think your story is really important and valid in your child's coming out journey. And then to answer your question, what I was going to say, the way I tackle any of this is shared struggle. So one thing we haven't spoken about is class, and I think it's really important that we focus on class. Right now in Britain, we have a government that praise themselves for being the most ethically diverse government we've ever had in Britain. But if we break it down, what does that actually mean? How many of these ethically diverse cabinet members were privately educated? How many of them went to Eton? How does that then affect the decision making? So I think it's really important that we think about class as well in the educational setting. I'm not a fan of private schools. I never have been. I think it causes segregation. I don't think we need them. Personally, as a child, I didn't agree with grammar schools either. And I still feel the same because I just think it creates segregation that then later in life affects everyday people. When you then apply for work, people are looking to see what schools and colleges you went to. And if it's not private school, you're never going to stand a chance. So I think the shared struggle is really important. I come from a working class background. So regardless of my race, I can at least share that struggle of coming from a lower socioeconomic status, especially from a working class perspective. So I think shared struggle is important. Like everyone's already said, you know, everyone's privileged in some kind of way. There's always going to be someone worse off. If you can understand a shared struggle against oppression, then really we're winning. And then, you know, the conversations can start from there.
Thank you very much, Sai. I appreciate that. Both
Yeah.
comments, actually.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with Sai in terms of that shared struggle, literacy as well around it, because actually I think, you know, talking as a teacher, you know, I was at one point an English teacher, and every teacher, I think the words diversity and inclusion they do come across as overwhelming and scary, because you start to think about your own lived experience, and perhaps if you are, you know, statistically, again, if we look at teaching demographics, they are still cisgendered and white from a majority standpoint, even though the students holistically that you might be teaching nationally and then internationally are from, I think if we were to look at it from just a stats and numbers point of view, hopefully we'd see that there isn't a particular dominant majority per se, but what there is a majority at leadership level and the people that define the culture of a school and a system of a school. So for teachers, I would say I mean, it's very easy for me to say don't be overwhelmed, but actually start with your students and your staff by just acknowledging that this is uncomfortable. I find it uncomfortable. If you do, I don't have all the right answers. I might say things out of turn and unintentionally offensive, like if they feel comfortable to do that. Hopefully they wouldn't, because again, in the UK anyway, teacher standards are quite clear cut in terms of you do need to be, you know, you have to be inclusive, you've got to be empathetic, you've got to center the students in front of you and their experiences, as opposed to, and this is the nuance, I guess, the curriculum sometimes in the UK does not favour, well, not sometimes, it doesn't favour the people that you're teaching. So if I'm teaching, you know, I remember when I was like in the classroom teaching not so long ago, I'm still trying to get my, at the time I was teaching at a school that was 90% students from a South Asian background. It was like, kind of going back to what Si said, it was a private school as well. And I taught there for a very short period of time. But there I am trying to teach them Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde and, you know, Victorian context. And actually, they just want to have a chat with me about the film they watched last night, or, you know, like the fact that, oh, we've got a South Asian, a Muslim English teacher. Let's talk about that, you know? So I think letting yourself be vulnerable in front of your students is important if you can build up the confidence to do that. Equally acknowledging that we will make mistakes, and empathy is key when you're going to start conversations in class. Equally, if there are school leaders on this call, it is I cannot emphasize enough how important training and development around language and curriculum, pastoral care, anti-bullying. If you center diversity and inclusion within your, what we call here like CPD, training and development, if you get diverse voices in, so like Si, like Beverly, like who can talk about it from a professional expertise standpoint, who do have the confidence, who can reassure your staff, that's important too. So that would be my advice. And also don't see it as an overnight process for teachers. They're not expecting, like even as a DEI lead and someone who's been has protected characteristics and has been involved in this field for like over 10 years, I still panic and sweat. You know, even come to this panel, I was like, okay, have I done my reading? Have I done, do you know what I mean? Like, because it is quite daunting and overwhelming. So acknowledge that, but then be transparent about it, and then encourage your school leaders to, if they want their students to thrive and succeed and belong, because we all know that those three are huge in education, they have to centralize DEI education.
Beverly, please.
Yes, I agree with what they have with what they have shared. It is also possible that the things that I will share with you are already being done in our schools and by our teachers. But I will share what I have experienced, you know, as a student. During my time when I was in high school, our teacher in English required us to read books that were really out of this world. Our teacher required us to read the Scarlet Letter. I tried so hard to find that book in the bookstore. I could not afford a brand new copy. I already forgot if I was able to find one and if I was able to read it. But even if I did not understand anything at all. It was about adultery in the 1850s that happened in the American society. That was diversity and inclusion, right? Something out of the comfort zone of the students. Of course not. Inclusion in our classroom could have started with our teacher asking us, her students, for our recommendation to be included in the class reading list. This might mean additional reading materials and effort for our teacher, but this would have updated our teacher's reading list. She would not be stuck with 1850 American literature for her Filipino junior and senior high school students. Our teacher might be surprised to know that many of us, her students, love reading and are book lovers as well. During that time, I have read novenas, the small books of prayers, Archie comics, Sweet Valley Twins, romance novels in Filipino and in English, and complicated novels such as The Pelican Brief that was owned by my father. So, I'm sorry, wait, please wait. So I think first, this is what Ms. Zahara already mentioned. First is we have to accept that we have our own limitations. Now, as a teachers, we have to be okay with that. We cannot introduce everything to our students, so we need our co-teachers' help, the students' help, their parents, and of course, the internet's help in presenting a diverse and inclusive classroom. Let us be honest with our student that our own perspective may not represent all the interesting things in this world. And it is okay that all together as teachers and students, it is good to explore many points of view.
Thank you so much. And I can tell you that as an American, I hated reading the Scarlet Letter too.
Oh my god.
I hated that book.
I was
I
also
really
just
did.
I just wanted to come in just on the back of what Beverly was saying, and I don't know whether like it might like Sari's probably read it. I heard the new in the UK we've had guidance in schools just before what was our half-term break of political impartiality in schools. So basically, and it is guidance. And again, this is where social media and the media goes a bit crazy, you know, goes a bit wild in my my opinion, whereby it's guidance, and they are trying to, when you read the guidance, you're like, okay, there is an agenda, but it's guidance and it's not telling me anything I don't know about, not imposing my political views. And like Beverly just said about, you know, we all do have opinions and perspectives, we just need to be kind and respectful of everyone, every diverse voice in the room. And I think if teachers are scared, I don't know whether, well, actually, I do think there's an element of fear, because I would have said that when I was teaching, sometimes you do say something that slips and you're like, I didn't mean that. And the students, as long as you've built trust, I think trust and relationships with kids is so important. Especially like, and that's going back to what I said originally about, you know, being transparent and vulnerable with your students. I guess I should have said, before you can do that, you've got to build relationships of trust beforehand, so that your students know you care and know that you're, which is what we do as teachers, you do care, you want, you know, teachers are good people, they want the best for their students. Trust first, and then it gets easier to have those uncomfortable conversations, and for you know, students to say to me, Miss, do I have to keep doing Shakespeare? Does it really matter? And there are points where I'd be like, look, I get it, but do you know what I mean? Like, just to kind of engage with them, and then that can lead on to lots of interesting, nuanced conversations where you don't need to be scared of guidance like the political impartiality that we have here, you know?
You know, there's a
Just
book
coming
that.
on, I
Oh,
think
go ahead.
there's a
Sorry.
really, yeah, and I was just going to say, I just think there's a really important point when we talk about government guidance. And for those of you that are not familiar with the politics of Britain, in 1988, a similar conservative government to the current one we have under Margaret Thatcher brought in Section 28. Now, what Section 28 was, teachers like yourselves weren't allowed to be seen to be promoting homosexuality. Now, just think about that. If you're a queer person in the classroom, you just could not talk about your existence or your life or your home style. Think about kids with same-sex parents, you know, how awful that was. And it was only in 2000, in the year 2000, that this homophobic clause was repealed. So I think government guidance is a very problematic issue when it comes to controlling you guys as teachers. I think you guys should be given the power to teach. And so I just think for people should understand that Section 28 existed. And if we're not careful, it could very easily come back.
Well, look at what's going on in Florida. And I don't want to say more. There
Mm.
was a brilliant book that I used to use, and I loved it for unpacking your own personal biases, except they made a film out of it. And so now it's not this, you already know going into it because you've seen the film, Knots and Crosses by Marjorie Black.
Yes.
Well, I love that
Mary
book.
Blackman, yeah.
Yeah, Blackman. And, you know, you'd go into it and your biases would be there. And all of a sudden, something as simple as a Band-Aid, the light went on and you realized. But now there's a film, and so it's not a big secret. And it's...
I did that for my dissertation because I focused on, I focused on multicultural literature and whether it condemns or condones interracial relationships in the 21st century. And it was so interesting because, I did that. And then a few other books, teenage fiction. And this is, again, this kind of fiction is allowed in the classroom, and you can explore, like, there's so much fiction associated with neurodiversity, LGBTQI plus. There's I think if I think about the practical, because I'm sure there are teachers on this webinar who are thinking this is all well and good, but I've got piles of marking. I've got reports to do. My head teacher or my head of department have, they're not on this wavelength. That teachers are taking time out of their day to attend this webinar. It's unless it has been scheduled into their CPD. It's probably done voluntarily to a certain extent, and I think that's where leadership is so important in a school and school culture, where they are, like Simon was saying, like, talk about Section 28 and talk about the fact that we don't want that to happen. Like, we have a diverse working body, as a professional body, as well as a diverse student body. We can't be exclusionary. We have to consider what story is our curriculum telling. I was at a diverse ed conference in the UK, and I've completely forgotten the name of the lady, which is really bad, but I can send it later. But there was a speaker there who just spoke about what story is your curriculum telling, and I thought that was such a brilliant sentence for curriculum leads and teachers to go, okay, who has power in the curriculum? Whose voice am I sharing? Who in my class is going to relate to this part of the curriculum? Because being an ex-English teacher, I have to say, one of the things that was a struggle, I guess, in especially in ethnically diverse classrooms, was teaching things like Pride and Prejudice. And instead, to teach Pride and Prejudice, I would teach Bride and Prejudice, or A Suitable Boy by Vikram Seth. I'd bring that in, and they'd be like, oh, it's, and I said, yeah, it's the same. Like, Mrs. Bennet is like my grandma, like, it's like, do you know what I mean? Like, just start to have those, just to get students to relate, and you will notice, like, this, I did like a project on that particular piece, and the results did, like, you do start noticing an increase in engagement, attainment, and progress. So then you can take that tangible data back to your leadership and say, oh, diversity does make a difference to what my school stands for. So that can be quite helpful for teachers, I think.
Well, thank you very, very much. I'm going to invite Jake in to start asking some of the questions from our audience. And audience, you can post questions. There's one that I'm going to start while we wait to bring him in. And it's about, how do we address children with disabilities in face-to-face classrooms? And I can't see the whole question. So Jake, if you can join us and you can get the whole question. But I just saw the first part of it. And I think that's something that when we talk about diversity, we didn't talk about that aspect of it. And that's part of it as well. We are, differently physically able. Hi, Jake.
I think oh yeah, go.
No, go ahead.
Hello.
Go ahead, Si.
I was just going to say, it comes back to intersectionality. We live in, as potentially 4 or 5 able-bodied individuals, we need to recognize our privilege. And actually, we talk about diversity of race, inclusion of sexuality and gender, but really, we have to start doing a lot better in representing and giving voices to disabled people because of our able-bodied privilege. And again, just think about the stories you hear in the media you consume, whether it's the films you watch, whatever it is, we have not got enough disabled representation. So Zara, you know, in Britain, we've seen some new actors come into mainstream TV, but again, we're really just scratching the surface. You know, we really need to do better, actually, and actually have like a whole seminar on tackling the discrimination that disabled people face, because it's at another level. Like, it just really is. And, you know, as 4 able-bodied people, I'm sure we can recognize our privilege.
Oh, 100%. And I think, again, like, that question is so important. And yeah, we haven't actually, and even like Kirsten, when you just said, you know, we haven't touched on that, it just again acknowledges that the privilege within protected characteristics themselves. And I'd say one thing I found recently, just anecdotally, was I was writing a blog on networking for students. And as I was writing it, I was like, I identify as a bit of an extrovert. I know you can't be fully introvert or extrovert, but I would say I definitely have more extroverted tendencies. So for me, networking and walking into, if I'm looking as a 14 to 15-year-old, I used to love going to those events. And even as a teacher, I loved taking up lots of people, as I am, you know, just talking, you know, to people, and I could. But when I was writing the blog, I was like, if you are autistic, or you have Asperger's syndrome, and even understanding, you know, I've done, as a DEI lead, I've worked really hard to talk to the people with that protected characteristic, and ask them, how do I talk about neurodiversity? What literacy and language should I use around disability? What is it that you see that I don't? What is it that you hear that I don't? The same questions that you would ask somebody with different protected characteristics, I guess. Like, people might ask me, well, what do you see about being a Muslim that I don't? What do you see about being a South Asian woman that I don't? What do you see about being a mother, part-time working mother, that I don't? So I think centralizing, like Simon said, the voices of people with physical disabilities as well as neurodiversity is extremely important, and listening to them in terms of what is it that would make, in this situation, in this particular context, the classroom more inclusive. Over here in schools, there is still, and you know, it's a bugbear of mine, where I am constantly working with teachers to outline that neurodiversity in particular does not mean a behavioral concern. Like, neurodiversity doesn't automatically mean that you are exhibiting poor behavior, I see it in Twitter posts, Facebook groups. Parents and teachers, parents especially, are worrying about their child who might be continuously excluded, or be told that they are limited in terms of their the progress they could make. Or, you know, in my going back to the English classroom, for example, and even the maths classroom, if you're dyslexic, you know, you might think that, oh, I can't do as well in English, or I can't do, if I'm mathematic, I can't remember the term for mathematic dyslexia, but I might not be able to do as well in maths. Psychologically, and from a mental and emotional standpoint, for a student, that puts barriers in place, when actually what a classroom again needs to do is flip it. How can you make your resources, your teaching styles, your culture, your physical environment, as well as your approach to teaching and learning, inclusive? Just like you would for somebody who's able-bodied. How are you going to do that for some? And it is more, it's hard. It's, you know, DEI isn't easy. Like, empathy is a skill that needs to be learned. Like, it's hard. But I think, again, if we focus on that with regards to training, like Sai said, like, centralize those voices, it makes the most wonderful impact on the students you're teaching. And I think that's what makes your teaching worth it, really.
Well, and it's not necessarily this massive ordeal to just take a step back and realize that you didn't see something.
Exactly. Yeah.
I had a student who was in an electric wheelchair, and it wasn't until another male student brought it to my attention that, even though the bathroom was ADA compliant. Because of the size of his wheelchair, it didn't work. And so he never was alone in the stall, and it was always awkward for him. And it wasn't fair because people were walking in on him. I'm like, well, then let's just make it a single use bathroom.
Yeah.
Let's do, but I talked to him first.
Mm.
And it was like, okay, this is going to be a little awkward, but let's be awkward because there's a problem that I didn't realize, and let's solve it together.
Yeah.
So, Beverly, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you very much. I will share with you my experience with giving opportunities to the PWDs, no persons with disability, in my line of work. And I think that I am very, very lucky to have a boss, a very supportive admin and management in our government agency, because I believe that, if we put money, if we allot money for persons with disability, we really give them opportunity. So I will not, I will be very straightforward. So it's really about, allocating money budget for them. So I will share with you the experience in my line of work. Uh, this is a book that we have launched last year. It is our team created this book, and it included literary works from various languages in the Philippines, which we always do in every issue of Annie. Annie in English means harvest. Uh, Annie is the official literary journal of the Cultural Center of the Philippines. But what is special in this issue is we have a section in that featured literary works and artworks about travel. Annie 41 is about travel. Uh, we've we have a section in this book that we have featured literary works and artworks about travel that were created with persons with disability. So we paid the persons with disability who contributed to this book, their works to this book. So it's called Annie 41. And I will show you during the launch, during the launching of the book, I, you know, it was very difficult for me to feature the works of the persons with disability because I didn't know how. So I'm very, very grateful that our management, gave me the freedom to choose a director who can do that. They did not deny me the freedom to choose the creative direction of the launching. So I will show you a part of the launching where the director decided to include the works of the persons with disability during the online launch of the book. So here we featured an essay by a PWD and a poem by a PWD. So we created a new song and a spoken word work out of their works. And the person who sang the song, the new song, was also a person with disability. She is from another region in the Philippines. And the director also believed that there should be a sign language interpreter. So we hired that person to do it. So, I think it's one of the new things in our activity for the person with disability. So, Sir Jake, could you please help me show this part of our book launch? I will show you. It's really new for us. Just a little bit of the part of the video.
Okay. Okay. Miss Bebang, give us a few seconds to set it up, okay?
Okay.
Okay,
So
and then we can do it, Curse, yeah.
okay, I will tell you more about the works. The essay was performed, it was turned into a spoken word piece by the author himself, Mr. Jack Lawrence Rivera, who's a student, fighting mental health disability. And then the poem was written by a female student in she's studying in a university. She also has, I think a depressive disorder. And then the woman who sang the song, she is blind. No, she is from the south of the Philippines. And then the sign language interpreter is a normal person who is an expert in this sign language. So I'm very happy that our management supported our decision to hire these people and give them, a budget, fund, and opportunity to showcase their works. And also, inside the book, we have featured one artwork by an autistic adult. He is a 30-year-old man, a non-verbal autistic person. So he also received money for contributing his artwork about travel. So I think the schools really have to a lot fund. We have to help our teachers, but physically, emotionally, philosophically, that's good. But we also have to help them financially. So we have to allocate money for that.
Okay. Okay. Miss Bebang, I think we're ready to share the clip. We'll just
I think 10 seconds will be enough. Okay, thank you.
Pawis ang mga mata, mabigat na mga paa, lubog ang katawan sa kama, walang ganang huminga, bawat marka sa kisame, bawat anino sa dingding, bawat muni ng...
That's beautiful.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you very much. It's more of the next part of that was more of a rant of a PWD. It's a little bit funny, but when it was performed, it became an artwork. It became an art. Thank
Excellent.
you. Thank you,
Thank you
sir.
so much. Jake, look, I think we have time for a couple of questions from the audience. I tried to incorporate them as we went along, but if you can pick out a couple questions that you think that we have not addressed yet, that would be great.
Okay, absolutely, Curse. And it's been a very insightful discussion. And I'd also like to thank the audience for engaging as they're also sharing their thoughts on the topic and also posting very good, very relevant questions. And we've picked out a few that we can also ask our panelists. And I'll start with this one. From your experience, what has been the most challenging aspect of promoting diversity and inclusion in schools? I think this is coming from teachers who would want to get something started on diversity and inclusion, and they'd want to be able to anticipate certain challenges or obstacles that they'll probably see or encounter as they take on this most important task. So, anyone, please.
I'll come in there just because it's been a recent experience. So the first thing is that treat it like a startup culture. So, and the reason I say that is because I'm quite, again, fortunate with the schools that I work with that this is my sole role. So it's not an additional responsibility. So I'm assuming a lot of the teachers, or I might be wrong, but there might be teachers on this call whereby it's an additional responsibility to their predominant work as a teacher. So be very mindful of your time and also what you can do. So the first thing I would do is really think about your time. So time, and then therefore that's why I said treat it like a startup culture. What is it that you can achieve within the time that you have? And it's not an overnight process. So schools are very reactive. Teachers are brilliant at getting things done in like record time compared to any other profession I've come across, just because we have to. We're dealing with kids, right, all the time. DEI is a cultural thread and set of action points where you're effectively trying to change people, and you're trying to educate them about a field where they may know about but have no they've never really had to act upon it, I guess. And that comes back to our conversations around privilege, intersectionality. So that's quite important. Treat it as a 3 to 5 year plan. Have a focus for every year on your strategy, on your school development plan. Figure out who you're in terms of barriers. Another barrier from that you might face is other teachers' time. So you will need support. You will need to speak to departments and other teachers for support. So maybe think carefully about who you can go, who can you build your own team. Again, that startup approach of building your own team. What do other people have the capacity to do? Who has an interest, and also who can centralize the voices of DEI within your school, on your staff body, who wants to be heard, who needs to have. I'd say that's a barrier, but also a solution to it, I'd say. And then the next point is parents. I would say I found parents, which I knew was going to be, because parents are bringing up their children with a particular set of core values. You are now coming in and challenging that and almost extending their set of core values. And that's at every level, from nursery all the way to university. And yeah, so I would say take your time at the very beginning of this work to establish those relationships and work really hard with treating it as a startup culture, but then your stakeholder of parents. Because as soon as a parent says, oh, don't like this, or not sure about this, a school needs to serve. That's where you might then come into further challenges from leadership. But yeah, those would be my 2 starting points.
Thank you, Zara. How about you, Sai?
I think, Zara, you covered it so eloquently. I don't really think I need to add anything.
Well, then can I pivot? Because there's a question about promoting positive gender identity. And that's something that I think is so critically important, and we can do it in simple ways. People may or may not have caught over the course of the different webinars I've done. I have 2 children, my son and my youngest. And that is how I refer to them, because referring to my youngest as any other term is a gendered term. And Zai's met them both.
Yeah, I think when we think about like gender identity as well, just like, again, when we think about an intersectional approach, just because we don't understand, or, I'm a cisgendered queer woman, and, I was born a woman and I identify as a woman. So I can't then relate to somebody who's different to me. So, I can't then say I'm more valid than them. One of the most simplest things, again, I in a teaching setting, I don't know how relevant this would be, but just add pronouns to your signatures or pronoun badges for teachers.
That's
Now,
huge.
again, the difference, it's so huge. So if somebody's questioning their gender identity, and you've got to remember this really affects people's mental health at a severe level. If you're not represented or you're being made to seem invalid, or your identity is invalidated, it can really have dire consequences, really extreme consequences. So from your perspective, just because you don't understand from your perspective, if a pronoun badge makes no difference to you, don't worry about yourself. Think about the person that's actually going to help. It doesn't make any difference to you. It's a badge. So one thing I encourage everyone to do is to incorporate their pronouns within signatures on social media, your personal signatures and your work signatures. But again, in the school setting, perhaps you can start wearing badges.
No, I just wanted to come in on that side because I've just done a lot of work with both the two schools that I work at, and then also a lot of writing recently on gender equity and gender equality, and like talking about gender. And it kind of goes back to what Sai said at the very beginning, and Kirsten, you too, about apology and society. So a lot of the stigmas and stereotypes attached to gender come from those uses of pronouns, and then we subliminally start thinking about the stereotypes. And the sort of, I'm going to use the most blanket common one, which probably, and again I'm just using because it's coming to mind, but boys will be boys, or stop acting like a girl, or you're a drama queen. Do you know? And I know teachers probably, I really hope that those terms aren't used in the classroom. They're very out of date. But if we think that we've all probably, like everybody's nodding, we've collectively acknowledged those, psychologically we know the sort of what they perpetuate, and that then links all the way back to just gender, like you said. And I think acknowledging that, you can again ask questions about people's pronouns. Ask people, what would you like me to call you? What do you like to be referred to as? And if they say, I don't know, I'd prefer just to be called my name, again, it is time and effort. Like I've spoken to, like Sai was saying, from a pronoun standpoint, I try to be really pragmatic and practical with staff and say, look, I know it means that if you've got a particular like letterhead and tech does its thing and populates it by itself, so you're going to have to go back and edit that. You're just going to have to do it. Like you're just going to have to ask your manager or your leader for a bit more time, or create, like, look, there are systems there that will probably help you with that. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's just asking those questions. And usually I think it's only an extra 5 to 10 minutes personally, like when you look at it quite pragmatically. But I think that can sometimes, and that's just not at school, I'm assuming even in the private sector and industry, that's probably, it can be a bit of a barrier. But yeah, I'd say again, flip it. Understand that it's not, like Sai said, and Kirsten, you said about apology. It's not about you and your ego and even your students. We have students who say, one of the things I've been tackling a lot is, oh, that's weird, or that's so gay. And I get quite, I think you can be quite hard line with students here, where I'm like, guys, I haven't been at school for a very long time, and that term was, even I knew 20 years ago that that's not what you say as a cisgendered, heteronormative, able-bodied woman, and you can see them going, oh, okay, right. Do you know what I mean? Like, just challenge them a little bit, because you can do that. Don't be afraid of being empathetic and caring about the individual.
Well, as Jake picks out our last question, I want to go on record and, a PhD in English, another English teacher in the room, it is perfectly acceptable to use they in the singular. It's been used that way for hundreds and hundreds of years.
Yeah.
And the example I like to do is say, the librarian went upstairs to get your book. They'll be back down in a minute.
Exactly. And even the royal we, you know, I'm like, we're using the royal we like as a singular pronoun, you know. Yeah, no.
Yeah. Okay. So we've established that they is definitely can be used in the singular. Jake, I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll have everyone give their final thoughts.
Yes, absolutely. We have one more very simple, but I think very important question. The context is students usually approach their teachers with questions on inclusion and diversity, even other issues about their individuality. How can teachers best prepare themselves for conversations like that? So, what are your tips and strategies that the teachers can learn to help them prepare for those kinds of conversations?
I think. Go ahead,
go on.
Si. No, go ahead, please. I was just going to say that I think you guys have already touched on the
Right.
fringe of this, but please.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think we've touched on it, but just, you know, you're a teacher. You're there to inspire and teach. So don't let anything take you by surprise. Everyone's different. So, you know, just try and be open. And I think just think about one of the most difficult conversations you've ever had in your life. You know, how did you feel when that was going on? Just put yourself in the child's perspective. And sometimes, you know, we live in a world with lots of stereotypes. Maybe they don't have that support at home, so maybe you're going to be that voice of reason that they need for good mental health. But I don't want to go over. I'm not a teacher, right? So maybe Zara.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. And it is that, you know, as a teacher, I understand that, you know, you are absolutely entitled to your privacy. Of course you are. And, you know, protected characteristics, as we call them here, they do make you feel vulnerable. And there is an argument to say that why should I, as someone with a protected characteristic or who is privileged, be the sort of center of that voice? I guess, again, if you flip it and think, well, you're also the center of a curriculum subject area, and students are going to look to you for that knowledge about the A grade or the A star or progress. And, you know, you can try and find that happy medium with your students. Obviously, and again, it comes down to trust and relationships. If they're asking you, you know, teachers, we're clever people. You know when a kid is pushing your buttons or they're asking you something from an agenda-driven standpoint, if that's kind of perhaps the most diplomatic way to put it. So, for example, when students found out that I was Muslim, when I first started teaching, there were certain questions they would ask me because I knew what kind of answer they were looking for. You know, they were almost feeding the stereotypes in a way and feeding bias. And so I would work harder to say, well, hang on a second, let's flip your question and think about where it's come from. And that then leads into perhaps more impactful discussions than you having to say, well, I am this is where I was born and raised. It takes the attention away from your personal identity. So if a student might say to me, so just like, again, going back to what Simon was saying in terms of I'm Muslim, oh, so I must not be gay, you know, like, and I used to have students and I'd be like, why are you asking that? Like, where have you read that? Like, what part, can you quote the part of the Quran to me that, and you could see them going, oh my God, she knows what she's talking, like, you know, she's questioning me. But that challenge them, flip it, turn it into another lesson, I guess. Yeah. Turn it into another learning standpoint. And again, trust and relationships, I'd say, with your kid, you know. And if you feel uncomfortable, just like if a student feels uncomfortable, you don't have to. You can say, this is making me feel uncomfortable. Let's change the subject.
Beverly, do you have anything you'd like to add?
Yes, thank you. On a personal level, a few years ago, I think it was in 2018, I have illustrated a book entitled Biak. It means it's a euphemism for vagina. It's a story about a grade 11 student who had a freak accident, and her vagina was, had a wound, you know. Anyway, we had fun doing that book, and it was launched online also in 2018 or 2019. And while we were, having fun discussing it, one of our audience members uh, sh- gave us a question, and he asked, she asked if it's possible to introduce it inside the classroom. so it was the first time that I thought of the subject. It was all about it. The book was full of illustrations of different kinds of vagina. So, we told the person that if the teacher first must be comfortable with the subject before he or she shares anything about it. So maybe the teacher has to admit, his her own limitation, and just tell the student if if there's a better person to discuss a certain kind of issue or certain kind of topic, it's better to tell the student that let's find about it together, and we'll invite someone to talk about it, and let the expert share share his or her insights.
That's a great insight. I mean, you don't necessarily have to talk about everything. You can bring in people, like we do, and bring you guys in, which is great. Sorry, I'm going to ask you for your final thoughts, but I think it's important that I do say something. My youngest is fully aware that I talk about them in these spaces. It's not my right to go and out anyone. So if any of you cringed when I started to identify, as much as I'm willing to identify of my youngest identity, full permission and support. So I think that's something that needed to be acknowledged. At least I felt I needed to acknowledge that. I want to ask everyone to give your final thoughts. But I want to thank you all for being here. I would love to continue this conversation for the next 20 hours, but and I think people would stay tuned. But maybe we'll revisit this, and we'll have diversity and inclusion part 2 in a few months, because I know that there are certain people who have things going on right now as well. Beverly, you have traditionally answered things last. Why don't you go first with the final thoughts? Oh, we can't hear you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Dr. Kristen, and to my co-panelists. Thank you. I have learned a lot. And Sir Jake, thank you for inviting me here. And to the organizers, thank you. So I will just read what I wrote to answer one of the questions that was given to me as preparation for this event. So diversity and inclusive education is like teaching our kids to think outside the box. All bases covered. What will others think about this project? How will others perceive this project? Something like that. In short, diversity and inclusive education help us to imagine from another point of view. They help us be more creative. And being creative is a very essential skill in learning because it promotes use of imagination, and it promotes not giving up on anything. These two, diversity and inclusive education, will make our kids think, have I considered everything? Have I covered all bases? What else can be done? I also have to mention this. Being creative is important, especially now that everything can be automated. Everything can be done by the artificial intelligence. The only things that the AI cannot do are to have feelings like a human being and to be creative. So diversity and inclusive education promote learning through the use of imagination and by teaching us to always consider others. Considering others is the heart of education. That will be all. Thank you.
Thank you so much. That was marvelous. I don't know, Sai or Zahara, who would like to go next.
I feel like Beverly covered it all. Sorry, Si.
Well, these are just your final thoughts. They don't have to be deep.
I think Zara should go at the end because she's the teacher and, like, you know, have the final message. I think that's important. I'll just leave with a quote. I think Maya Angelou says it best. If you're always trying to be normal, you'll never know how amazing you can be. And I think that's really the take home from this. We're all different. Let's celebrate our differences. And honestly, there is no shame in recognizing your privilege. I recognize mine by being here. So now let's all start recognizing ours. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you.
I feel like there's a lot of pressure now. I was just going to say, from a classroom perspective and from a teacher's perspective, I know it's time consuming. And I know, going back to like kind of taking this 360, that we are working within a particular system, within particular norms, within a culture where, you know, it is fight or flight. It is working, as much as we're trying to draw back with regards to our well-being and our mental health, academics and pushing a particular curriculum, which I shouldn't probably say it, but it is inclusive perhaps from a surface level standpoint, but whether it's truly inclusive and diverse is a whole other conversation altogether. But do encourage your leaders, encourage your management, spend that time to try and be more inclusive around your curriculum areas. And it's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to ask for help. It's okay not to know the answer. You know, don't let that affect don't let that become a barrier to you making your classrooms more diverse and inclusive, because the will is there. It just takes perhaps a bit of reading, a bit of learning, and then a transparent conversation with your students and colleagues. Sorry, it's not that articulate, but
no, that's awesome.
Pressure.
I hope that people learned as much as I did. I want to reinforce something that Beverly brought up. When you're looking to engage in this topic with your students, find interesting, new, relevant material. You know, you don't have to read the Scarlet Letter. Please don't read the Scarlet Letter. I'm going to get hate mail for that now. But, you know, go and engage. Find out what your students are reading. Ask them what they want to engage with. And use other forms. You can talk about movies. You can talk about popular culture, you know, in music and videos and television programs. There's starting to be representation, but also talk about where the representation isn't. There was an article I read years ago that one of the things that paved the way for Barack Obama to be elected president was the television show 24. Because they had a Black president, people could imagine a Black president. So if you want to engage with these topics, young adult literature, young adult fiction, great place to start. Again, Knots and Crosses is one of my favorites. I haven't seen the movie, but okay. I think that we have gone on for quite a long time. A couple housekeeping things. There have been questions about the e-certificate. We want you to learn more than just our wonderful panel. We want you to take the course on FREEJOO. It is free. It is the course on diversity and inclusivity. Please sign up for it. Beverly touched on the idea of creativity and how important creativity is. We also have a new class available by a content partner, which is the Introduction to STEAM Education. And STEAM is really important because there's been this big push for the STEM fields, but we need the arts as well. So we would encourage you to check out Gail's class on STEAM education. We have another webinar next week. We have revised our schedule. And because of what's going on in the world right now and the uncertainty that people are facing, we are doing another webinar like this next week, but it is on emotional intelligence, because, you know, people are feeling all kinds of stresses and you may be feeling them. Your students may be experiencing them. You may not even know why. So that's going to be a really important topic. Please join us. I almost said, well, I'm going to say it, same bat time, same bat channel. That's how old I am, you know, the old Batman TV show. But please join us next week for that. Jake, what other housekeeping things do we have?
That's about it. And of course, this is also an invitation for our teachers to look at all the other courses available on FREEJOO. If you want to become the best 21st century teacher that you want to be, then you'll find that there's so many wonderful courses that will help you learn about online teaching, hybrid learning, very specific skills on using technology in the classroom, leadership, name it, we've got it. So you're all invited to sign up and register on FREEJOO and explore the courses as much as you want and get e-certificates for them.
Yes, please, please do. And I just want to again thank all the teachers who are joining us either live today or who will watch this in the future. You have an incredibly important, amazingly challenging job. It's okay to make mistakes when you talk about issues of diversity, inclusion. I screw up my pronouns with my kid all the time. And as long as I'm trying, they're good with it. And as long as you're trying, it's okay. We're all human. We all make mistakes. Please keep doing what you're doing, and know that you are supported, appreciated, and loved. And thank you all for joining us today. And we will see you next week. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye, everyone.
Stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe.
Hi. I am Jenny and welcome to FREEJOO, the global community of educators. Let me show you why as an educator you should make FREEJOO an important part of your teaching and learning practice. A community of teaching practice is important for any educator. On FREEJOO you will be able to access CollabEd, which is like LinkedIn but for educators. Here you will be able to connect and network with other educators from all around the world. You can build your own community of teaching practice or join one of the many other existing groups and learn and share ideas, lesson plans, etc. with each other. Then, for a more formalized approach to professional development, you can go to SkillEd, which is like Netflix for educators. Here, you will be able to access a wide range of courses designed by global experts that will help you to learn about new pedagogical, technical, and soft skills, all related to 21st century education and the future of work. There are more than 20 courses available for free, and for more advanced level courses, you can upgrade to the Silver membership plan for just $20 per year and get access to all courses designed by Akadasia. The courses are available in English and in several other Asian languages. And what's more, you will receive a free verifiable and tamper-proof digital certificate for each course that you complete. If you have upgraded your membership to the Silver, Gold, or Platinum plans, you also get access to DesignEd, which is like Canva for educators. Here you will find the easiest and fastest way to practice your own instructional design skills and build your own courses. We have pre-integrated several third-party edtech apps like Flipgrid, Canva, Mentimeter, Padlet, H5P, Zoom, etc. right into FREEJOO so you can make your courses engaging and fun for your own learners. As you can see, there is a lot you can do on FREEJOO as an educator. So what are you waiting for? Go to www.freejoo.com and get your very own free lifetime membership today. See you soon on FREEJOO.